Hey guys, most of you know me. I'm Chelsea. I'm a sales and growth advisor who mainly specializes in working with agencies. Today on the live, I have McKay, who also specializes in working with agencies, mainly on the sales messaging side. And we want to discuss how agencies can better communicate their unique selling points so they can earn new business and increase sales. To get started, I'm going to have McKay introduce himself and just share a little bit more about what he does and his why he does it.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm really excited to be here. Like I said, my name is McKay Savage. I work with primarily agencies, but businesses that struggle to express to their clients what makes them unique in a way that allows them to understand and communicate that to other people, right? Um, Honestly, as to my why, like why I do it, I have been in agency sales for a long time. And over time, I realized that if you can help your potential client or whoever you're working with understand what you do to a level that you can then communicate it to someone else, they are much more likely to make that purchase decision, not only individually, but as a team, because that message can get into that organization and that spread, right? So again, briefly, I work with these agencies and businesses to identify, again, what that message needs to be, what their unique elements are that we can weave into that. And then we build out what I like to term brand vocabulary, which are unique elements designed and built for you that you can, I'm sorry, you should say like unique terms designed and built for you. You can then put into your sales message, put into your sales collateral, into your sales conversations, and ultimately make those a lot more efficient and a lot stickier in the minds of your receivers. So I'm excited for this conversation. I can't wait to break into it. I know you have a big focus on having that kind of collateral and that process set up before you get into a sales conversation. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so for me, and why we are such a complement to each other is because when I go into an agency, I have to look at everything. Most of the times, they don't really have a go-to-market strategy. They opened up an agency, they started getting some referrals, doing great work, and that's how these agencies get started. It's because they're great at what they do and they're great at fulfilling projects. But what they don't have is that background in sales.
Mm.
And they don't understand little things, just the beginning stages of building a business, the foundation, which starts with identifying your target audience, right? We just talked about, even before this call, how a lot of times I'll go to speak to an agency and they'll tell me who can potentially benefit from their services. For example, like a website development agency. I'll be like, okay, well, who are you trying to reach? Who are you selling to? And they'll say, anybody who needs a website.
Right.
Which is true. They could potentially do that, but that's a total addressable market. That's not a subset. That's not a group of people that's truly their ideal customer profile, which would be their ICP. So in the beginning stages, we really need to nail down when I'm working with them, who that is, who are they trying to reach? And then the next stage, which is where McKay comes in, is, okay, what problem are you solving? Why do you want to solve this problem? Why do you want to work with them? And what's the messaging around that? Because that messaging, that value proposition, how you explain your why is going to feed into everything else, your website, your case studies, your sales collateral, your email copy, the way you show up to people, the way you educate them and move them down the funnel. So that's exactly why, obviously we connected early on. And I even connected with you for my own personal brand because I needed clarity as well.
I think you touched on something huge right there, where you're talking about the difference between an ICP and a total addressable market, right?
Mm-hmm.
To kind of rewind just a little bit back to that. The reason it's important to have an ICP versus, again, in your example, like everyone needs a website, why don't we sell to everybody? Is because when you are starting an agency as an expert in your industry, as an expert in your craft, in your field, right? Your mind, your understanding is at a higher plane than the
Mm-hmm.
people you're selling to, right? And the people you're selling to, if you want to look at that total addressable market, they also exist on a spectrum of understanding, right? So if you are again, a web dev agency and you're selling to, a SaaS company, you might have there might be a pretty good crossover on what they understand and what you want to tell them, right? You're probably still
Mm-hmm.
going to be the expert in your field, but they'll have some pretty good understanding. But if you want to start selling to plumbers, an electrician, right? Somebody that has very little technical knowledge. You have to change the way you're communicating that information to them. And if you haven't identified a specific subset or a specific group that you want to target, that messaging is going to be scattered and it's going to be all over the place, right?
Mm.
So that's why it's so important, even before we start identifying, well, how can we communicate this? How we communicate is going to depend on who you're talking to, which is why identifying that ICP is so important, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, any thoughts on that? Like that's
Yeah. It's so
that
funny
came to me as
because
you were talking about that.
no, that's legitimately like how I guide my clients as well. They always tell me it's always the same conversation. Like they'll talk to me and I'll be like, okay, you're using this terminology, maybe your headline's a little confusing, and I give that feedback. And then they'll say to me, well, my clients are so savvy. My clients, they know the people that I'm going out to, they know these terms. And while that might be true, their brains of like your prospects' brains are overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And they don't have the brain power with everything they're inundated with to decipher sometimes even these big words. And if they land on, let's say, your email or your website and your homepage, and it's confusing to them in any way, you're going to lose them. The deal is done by that point. So I always say to people like, okay, take me through what you do, pretend I know nothing, pretend you're talking to a 10-year-old, explain to a 10-year-old exactly what you do. And
Yeah.
for me, I have a daughter who's almost 10. So it's easy for me to envision like me trying to explain to my daughter Maya what this company does. So when I'm trying to write out their messaging, I do that. But for people who have been in their industry for so long, are experts, when I ask them that question, okay, explain to a 10-year-old what you do, they always get stuck. They can't, they don't know how.
Yeah. I think we feel good, especially like in a sales presentation. We feel good putting up industry jargon, complex
Mm-hmm.
terms, right? It's like, hey, look how smart we are. Look how we're going to feel, right? One of my very favorite, um, I don't know why the soda industry is full of like these amazing marketing principles like on display throughout history. Like Coca-Cola is one of my favorite, but like one of my favorites for this example is Crystal Pepsi that came out however long ago, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is like in those presentations, in human nature, we want to avoid at all costs discomfort. And one of the things that causes us the most discomfort is when we don't understand or we have certain expectations that are misaligned with what we're looking for. Okay. So bring up Crystal Pepsi as an example because they brought this out. It's Pepsi. It tastes exactly like Pepsi, but they didn't put in like the caramel coloring. And so it's clear, like Sprite, like something like that. And so when this came out, they were like, it's super fun, it's Crystal Pepsi, blah, blah, blah. People hated it. It tasted exactly like Pepsi, but in there, they were so programmed to like, oh, it's a clear, fuzzy soda or a bubbly soda, right? It's going to be lemon lime flavor. It's going to be Sprite. It's going to be 7 Up. It's going to
Oh,
taste like this. And then when it tasted like cola, it throws people off, and it flopped enormously. And now it comes back every once in a while because there's like the nostalgia element to it. But that's such a great example of when you're getting in a sales presentation and you start throwing up all these terms and people are expecting to be like, okay, they're going to teach me about their brand, that I'm going to feel enlightened, and they don't understand what's going on. That's causing friction in
mhm.
themselves, and they're going to retreat from that conversation and they're not going to like it. Even if you've succeeded in your goal of presenting yourself as being super savvy and super wise, right? If they feel uncomfortable because they don't have that same understanding, they're not going to want to work with you. And I think we miss that. We have the goal of again presenting ourselves as like the expert, as the fan. I mean, we've all been there when I think this happens a lot with like doctors, where you're in an emergency, you need help, you want to help this person help you, and they come in and they throw out all their medical terms, and you're like, I don't understand what you told me. I don't feel comfortable. I trust that you're an expert. You certainly seem smarter than me, but I don't really want to work with you because I don't feel comfortable and I don't feel like I understand what's going on. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. And I think there's that fine line because let's say you pick an ICP and you do a good job and you are a website development agency, we'll just stick with that. And you say, I'm going to target nonprofits who are focused in the healthcare space. Okay, so now we have an actual subset of people, of organizations that we can reach out to. So we have to lean in a little bit to wording and vocabulary that would resonate with them, but at the same time, not use too many acronyms, not go too heavy on the jargon on website side, right? Because they're not going to know that.
Yeah.
But we can maybe use some language that they're used to hearing, but also keep in mind that you're going to be reaching out. Let's say you're doing an outreach campaign. You're going to be reaching out to possibly 20, 30 people at that organization, and not all of them have a high level of understanding,
Yeah.
like you said. So you do have to keep it basic. And I think there's something so soothing about receiving an email, going to a website, getting a deck where your brain can take a little mini vacation and it can just read it, absorb it. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yep.
peaceful. It's soothing to the nervous system. It makes you feel safe. And when you're in that space of safety, I think, your guard is down and maybe you're more inclined to buy. What are your
I
thoughts on
think,
that?
I love that. I love that example of like taking it, because I just the other day I had the opposite experience where I got an email and I was like, this looks kind of interesting. Let me check into this. I
Mhm.
jumped onto their website and I seriously, it became for me as like a messaging guy, I was like, I got to figure out what these people do. Like it's got to be here somewhere. And so I was
Yeah.
on all these pages and it became like for me like a game, but it was certainly not a vacation and it was certainly not like I did not go into that. I did not in that engagement feeling
Mhm.
comfortable and understanding what they did. And I loved your point though about it's not just a case of going simple all the time because while going simple will guarantee that you are understood and that will create those feelings of engagement and like being on the same page, right? You will connect more if you are able to speak to them in their language, like you said. Like if you can include some of these elements of maybe industry terms that everyone is familiar with, and you can ensure that they are familiar with, right? To that point, though, and this is maybe a little bit of a plug, that's why I'm a fan of this system of brand vocabulary, because you can start with the basics. And then in that conversation, it's usually not on a website, it's usually not in that first contact, but in that sales conversation, you can establish as like together some
Mhm.
agreed upon terms you're going to use to describe the solution that you're providing to them, right? And
Yeah.
then there's no need to rely on previously understood terms or background experience or anything like that because you build that understanding in the conversation together so that you can then have a higher elevated conversation speaking about the solution you're going to provide with terms you guys have agreed upon together. And that's kind of the power of that brand vocabulary is it allows you to go from that basic understanding to a little bit of a higher level while ensuring that everyone is always understanding and you've maintained that. I think even strengthen that feeling of being on the same page because you've now agreed on these terms together before you've proceeded into that conversation.
Yeah. So take me a little bit through your process.
That's a good question. So I think we also kind of talked about this a little bit ahead of time. I would love to have a handoff from you where you've done the legwork of walk me through your ICP. Let's identify, because that's usually where I try to start at the beginning. Because if that, kind of like we talked about, if that hasn't been done, anything you're going to determine is just not going to, it's going to be meaningless,
Yeah.
right? Because you're targeting a different area of that addressable market and it's going to misalign more than likely. So assuming that that has been completed, right? I sit down and we would talk about, honestly, it's really more conversational because that's when a lot of those, what I like to call like those small, unique elements tend to come through. When you ask someone, hey, talk to me about, again, what your web dev agency does, they're more than likely going to go into a list of, again, services, everything else that realistically everybody else in the market is also providing, right? There's very little sellable, unique value there, right? And it's usually through more of a conversational tone that those small kind of, we'll call those unique elements will tend to kind of bubble up to the surface, and we can grab those and say, hey, when you tell people in a sales conversation, hey, we're going to build you a website, people know what a website is, right? You don't need to make a brand term for a website. That would be ridiculous, right? But this now new brand, like special element that we've just identified that really we don't have a name for, that's commonly agreed upon because it's unique to you. It's special to you and your brand and what you bring to the table. Those are the elements. Usually it's about 3 to 5 that in the course of that conversation we'll identify, and then we will work together to really kind of hone those into a solid idea, and then we'll name those and present you with some sales material and some systems of communicating those ideas to your clients. It sounds pretty amorphous as I'm describing it, but
Yeah.
it really is like simple names. Like, again, one, like I've said, brand vocabulary. That's one that I had to do for myself as I was like, what do we call these terms? How can we identify them? What's something that I can give you brand vocabulary and you can kind of get a semblance of what it is, and then I can define it for you. And now we can use that in our conversation. Brand vocabulary is the best example of brand vocabulary, usually, in that I can use.
Yeah.
But that's usually the process. And then you're left with that system that you can then take and, like you said, use it in sales collateral, sales conversations, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So for me, I know you've helped me with one word in particular, because part of my process involves CRM work. And I was struggling in how to communicate what that was, because we do a lot with the CRM. We're looking at past prospects. We're looking at people that were past clients, customers, how they're coded. Is the data clean? And you're like, CRM hygiene. There's one word that I took, could write an essay on my process. It's like CRM hygiene, right? So for agencies, has there, maybe when you've worked with, is there an example of a term, or, usually in a deck, I'll put like I told you, like a unique selling point, like why choose X agency, right? And then we just list the unique points. Anything you can share that you found maybe with a past client?
That's a great question. I'll share one of my favorite examples. So this is, again, I was with this is funny. This is a web dev agency that I was working with very early on in this process. And this is as I was kind of I love this example particularly because it helped me identify the need for brand vocabulary. Okay. Because we were looking at their offering, we're walking through what they're doing. And I told him, I was like, nothing is sticking out. Nothing resonates with me. Like, there is no difference between what I'm seeing on your little services page and 4 other web dev agencies that I can pull up at any given time. And we haven't talked about this yet, but when you can't differentiate yourself with a unique element, you become a commodity.
Yeah.
You become a commodity that is widely available in the market, and you compete on price. That is your option.
100%.
That's your option. If you cannot correctly distinguish yourself with some unique elements. So as we were talking about this is where I was saying that conversation comes up. And as like, again, as to my why, I love this because I do think, and maybe this is a case of me needing to sit down and do some brand vocab to express how I do it. But I love those conversations because I get to pull out those, again, those little nuggets of goodness that we get to then identify. And as we were talking, he was mentioning about their SEO service. And I was like, talk to me about your SEO. What is it, right? Search engine optimization. Let's get into it. Because at this point, they had just listed SEO. So he's talking and he says, look, most agencies, when they say SEO, they just mean Google, right? It's Google optimization. He's like, when we say SEO, we are doing all search engines because it's a non-trivial amount of search that is on Bing, that are on these other search engines. And if you're not optimized for all of those, that can mean a difference of 15 to 20% sometimes in search volume, right? And so he mentioned, as he's talking about that, I was like, stop. That right there, that seems like common knowledge to you. That is that unique element. And so we came up together with the term, we call it true SEO, which is true search engine optimization. Again, it's based on that common term of SEO. And so people feel like they understand what it is, but it's different enough that they go, well, wait, hold on. What's true SEO? Talk to me about that. And you say, oh, great. And then you can explain. Most people just do Google. We do all search engine SEO. And that is now a very clear delineation of this is what makes us unique. This is what makes us special. And it's so easy to understand that your client can take that and go to their boss and be like, I like these guys because they do true SEO. And he's like, well, what's true SEO? And you're like, well, most people just do Google. And you can see how that can now turn into a very easily communicated idea that can now be an advocate for your brand as they go through that the sales conversation internally. So true SEO is my favorite example. It kind of paved the way for brand vocabulary even.
I love that. Yes, because you want to give people reasons to buy from you, especially in this B2B atmosphere. They need to go to leadership and convince them. And they're honestly, most of the time, if you do a good job as a salesperson, they're on your side and
Right.
they want your help. They want a new website, but they need to go with those reasons, like you said, true SEO. And I've been in the situation as well, McKay, where I've sat down with an agency and they're telling me their list of strengths, right? Like we're going through a SWOT analysis, let's say. And I'm like, there's nothing sticking out. You're like, they think they're very special and they are special. God made them, they're special. But when I'm sitting with them, I'm like, they're not that special. So one approach I've taken, and I'd love your feedback on this, is opening up all of their clients, looking at their clients, seeing if I could find commonalities.
Mm.
And then let's say I look and I see that they've worked a lot with, I don't know, like educational platforms or something, right? Looking at those clients and saying, okay, can we pull from here something that makes you unique because you understand this client, this subset of people? Let's go back.
Right.
We could even say more simple, like the nonprofits. Okay, if you understand nonprofits who deal with hunger, right? Like, or child hunger, child development, whatever it is, you can be very specific to that group. And now you're an expert in developing websites or brand or creative or whatever for this type of client. And now when we go to our ICP, back to that, maybe we're pulling leads who are people or organizations in that same space, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you actually have to work backwards. Or you can be left in a situation where you're like scratching your head because there it is very common. And then they get into these price wars. And that's essentially what ends up happening. It's like, how low can you go? And you never want to be in that position ever.
The price limbo, right? Like how low can
Yeah.
you possibly go, right? I I love that because the nice thing, I should say, one of the many benefits of working through this process is if you get to the point where you say, we don't have any unique elements or we have no identifiable unique elements, then you have two options. You dig deeper, like you just described, which is awesome because in reality, if you've been doing this for a while and you have had more than one client, right? There is
Yeah.
going to be a level of, again, experience in a specific industry or something that you can pull from and make your own, right? That will be there and it is possible. The other option, and I have actually done this before with a client as well, was you have to create some unique elements.
Mm-hmm.
You sit there and you realize, okay, what are we going to do to communicate that we are special or increase the uniqueness of our offering? Let's come up with some specific supporting offers, supporting those could be processes internally, right? There could be any number of things that you now have to create to distinguish yourself from the competition, right? And as we, and again, that's almost the best way sometimes, especially if
Yeah.
you're starting out, because then you get to captain that and you have internally a really great understanding of like, hey, we've named this thing we're going to have. An example of that would probably be this is a simple one, but it was an agency guy that I was working with, and we talked about how one of the big downsides to agencies, or I say one of the weaknesses, I should say, is their client communication and how they manage that back and forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we should distinguish ourselves here. We did not have enough unique elements to really build out a full suite. So I said, let's distinguish ourselves here. And we came up with the term hotline. And all that is we say, look, during your onboarding process, you have to identify, it's probably going to be like the cell phone for the CEO, like some kind of absolute, always available form of communication that is only used for emergencies, but is used, and you communicate that to the agency, to the client by saying, hey, we never want to be stalled out working on your project and wasting your time. Sometimes clients have trouble get back to us. What is a hotline we can establish where I can always get an answer from you so we are never waiting on you to get working and getting the most out of your money, right? And so that was something that we had to create, but we already created it with the brand term. They could roll that out internally. Everyone was on board, and is really successful because it's something that's easy to understand, but it also helped create a differentiator that really helped them stand out from their competition.
I absolutely love that term. And I can tell you, because I've worked in this agency space for a long time, how much of an issue that actually is.
It's huge. It's
They
huge.
don't respond quick enough. And this leads me to another point going back. So oftentimes, like I said in the beginning, the agencies start out because maybe there's someone who worked at an agency, they break out, they now have a couple clients, word of mouth, and then business just goes. But they don't have a go-to-market strategy, right? And for an agency that's just starting out, they might not have those unique selling points. They won't have years of experience or, clients they can dig into. So I love this idea of just creating it. One thing, I had an agency that was starting up video production, and I said to them, you have to have something unique. Like, we call it different things, but
Right.
why choose us? And I said, it's got to be speed, because they were new, they were hungry. And I knew the other agencies, because I'd worked with them, they were slow. They were like, oh, we'll take on the project, but we need 8 weeks. And this
Right.
happens all the time in the agency space. They're almost like pushing projects away when they get to a certain point, where
Yeah.
they'll say, I need 8 weeks, or that RFP says they need the project done in a month. We can't do it. We'll push it away. So I said, be hungry, be scrappy, be quick, be quick to produce. And that was their unique selling point. We're like, we're going to get you video done in X for live video, X for animated. And that helped them, because it's like a stream. And that's how they sold their first few deals, because they didn't really have much else. They didn't have clients. They didn't have referrals. They didn't have feedback.
I love that. And without that process, without you guys having that conversation ahead of time, they would have gone to market and been like,
Mm-hmm.
it would have just been crickets. Because it's like, why in the world would I go with this agency that has never done any work
Yeah.
versus if they offer the same thing? Like, why in the world would we do that? And it's so funny because, again, we're talking about, and for all of you like marketers out there, all you marketing agency people that are listening to this, you're good at marketing.
Yeah.
Like, you know what you're doing. Doing what everyone else is doing is not good marketing. Like, that is the opposite of what marketing is supposed to be. And it's why we see, by the time those trends roll out, where it's like, here's how you do this, they're usually dead, because then everyone starts doing them and they stop being effective, right? And so that applies to your offering, and it applies to how you're having those sales conversations, right? If people come and you're responding to an RFP and you're like, well, how does everyone else do it? Let's just do that, and let's just make sure we put our stuff in there the same as everybody else. It's not going to succeed, and especially it's not going to succeed if you don't even have any unique distinguishers or unique elements that you can point to and easily communicate to your potential clients. Like, it's so funny to me that it's like the foundation of marketing is like standing out,
What
being
an
different.
agency.
Like,
Yeah.
this like basic stuff, and it's something, again, we just get caught up in wanting to produce and wanting to do our best work, and a lot of times we're so focused on clients that it's hard to focus that on our internal process. It takes some intensity.
Yeah. That's why a lot of times I'm sure you're working with the founders, because a lot of times in agencies, I would say in that like under 10 million space, the founders are leading sales.
Yeah.
And let's differentiate, because sales is not marketing.
Right. Right.
A lot of what you do actually orients more, I would say, around sales
I like that a lot.
in a sense, although they can cross over.
They're cousins. They're
They're
close.
cousins.
They're kids and cousins. We'll call
They're,
them.
they're kids and cousins. They are. But this sales element is so important. And we've
Totally.
said it to each other where we're like, yeah, sometimes they're like the shoemaker with no shoes. And then you have to come in, especially when a CEO wants to lift that burden. They want to transition out of being founder-led in sales, and they want to just go over and become the CEO that they dream of being. So they have to have these things in place. The other thing is, even with brand development agencies, I see it like that headline on the website. I have to talk about it on this live, because if anyone's listening, I can't even tell you how many websites I've gone to, because I partner with agencies, or like I'm working with another agency and I'm like, what do they do? That headline needs to be super, super clear. And honestly, I think that's like number one. It would be get that headline down, get that value prop, like that a sentence elevator pitch, get that down. Say exactly what you do and who you do it for. You know, we are
Yeah.
a advertising agency for beverage brands, period, right? Like that really needs to be in there. Because nowadays, a lot of people, they're doing the outreach. The agencies are starting to catch on. Okay, we got to do some outreach. But then when you drive the people to the website, because that's the next step a prospect would take, is they'd go to the website and they look on it, they're going to get confused and then they're going to click off.
That's one of those, like, when you think about what, for like a full stack agency or even like a web dev agency, right?
Yeah,
Not to continue to harp on those guys. You
I
think
know,
about
right? We're
what
like
they get
really dragging
hired
them.
with you, right? Or like, hey, pay attention. No, but you think about what they get hired to do, which is to develop these campaigns and then roll them out across all platforms. Like, it would be insane to have a marketing agency that's like, well, we started all these ads, but we're just going to pipe people over to the old website and like see how that goes. It's like, what? Like, no, like, you're going to map that out. And yet we do that with ourselves. Like you're saying, we start having these new sales conversations. We're having outreach. We're doing all this stuff, but we don't roll that back through the rest of the process because it's effort and it's work and it's hard to update the website again, even though it was built last year, right? Like, it can be frustrating and challenging and hard to do. But again, we think we can get away with it because we're in the marketing space, because we're in the sales space, because we would never do this for our clients, but we feel like we can get away with it ourselves because we're special, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
And like, and I loved your point about it usually comes down to the founder to have those sales conversations and to have those. And that's one of the, I will say, that's one of the biggest, I don't want to call it red flags. It's more of a symptom of a undefined sales message is if the CEO or the founder or executive leadership cannot delegate sales conversations. If they're unable to delegate sales conversations, it is a symptom of not maybe like a misaligned, but also like a scattered or undefined sales message. And the reason for that is a founder, particularly a founder who has started an agency because they're good at what they do, is in those conversations with potential clients going to communicate sometimes unconsciously what it is that makes them special, right? And people leave those conversations with founders and they're like, wow, I feel so great. I feel so excited. These guys know what they're doing and they feel good. But then they go to internally and it's like, well, why is this guy better than this guy? And we're like, you just got to talk to the guy. You got to go and talk to the founder, right? Because he's going to give it to you. I can't tell you because I just kind of gleaned it from our conversation. But if you talk to him, you'll also glean it from the conversation, right? Versus a fully identified, structured, and informed sales message that can then be transferred and delegated to a sales representative or to anyone else on the team. That will be able to not only be delegated to, and that will be, you can give that from a sales representative, but when someone receives it, they can also understand it and take it internally as well. And you're not relying on the charisma and the passion of a founder to kind of osmosis those. That's the wrong term, right? Either way, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like just embedding that into the conversation versus intentionally driving it, if that makes any sense.
100%. It's like an energetic transfer that the CEO has to the prospect. And I've been in positions where we're building these dream teams out and we're building out a sales team. And the CEO will get frustrated. And I have to put it kind of back to the CEO because those things need to be documented.
Right.
So if you're going to transition out, of course, you need that brand vocab down. You need your messaging. You need your why. Your team needs to understand, why are they there? Like, okay, not just to build websites and make money. Why? Why websites? Like, why are you building this company? What impact are you making beyond just money? And then documenting also like feedback that you've gleaned from customers, from people how about people that didn't choose you? Did you have that feedback written down? Because that informs your messaging as well, because they're telling you why they went with a competitor, or your clients telling you why they went with you. They're establishing that unique identifier right there. So it's very important, so important to just early stages. Let's say you're a CEO, you have a team of 3, 5. Start writing it down. Create a brand script, create a one sheet, start documenting case studies, what's happened, what's occurred, what have you actually done? Because then when someone like you and I will come in, we'll have something to pull off of out of just having to telepathically like pull it out of your brain. Because that's not so easy either.
And it's much more expensive, frankly.
Yes.
Like it's a lot more expensive to sit down and be like, we're gonna take 10 hours of your time to just talk and get everything and glean it, right? Versus like you're saying, if you can be intentional about recording, okay. And again, this comes back to if you are getting started and you have not done these processes already, you're for the first half of this conversation really talked about, getting out there into the market. You're going to struggle to differentiate yourself for sure. But the second half is now talking about growing and delegating sales and not just being the hamster in the wheel that has to run to bring sales in to keep the agency going. If you start by identifying those things before you get going, maybe they'll change over time, but it's much easier to change them because you're intentional about where you started, right? Versus just finding yourself somewhere 3 or 4 or 5, 10 years down the road, and then being like, let's now dig in and again work with Chelsea or McKay to figure this out over the course of weeks because we haven't taken the time to document it, right?
Yeah.
And that's not even touching on like documenting like the internal processes. Before I decided, I was like, hey, I think I really want to focus on the sales conversation. I had also originally started with like internal process of agencies because that is on its own an entirely
Oh, yes.
huge sticking point. So I just throw that out there. That's just for anyone listening, right? Like I would probably even recommend, I love the E-Myth Revisited as a book
Yeah.
about identifying that. Like that is start there. Holy cow. Please start there. Like if you haven't done that already, it's going to be a huge deal. But
Reminds
anyway.
me of like the baker who's baking the cakes. Like
Right. Yeah.
from
You're just
that little story about the baker baking
100%.
all the
Yep.
cake. Like you can bake the cake, but you don't know how to teach people how to bake the cake and sell the cake, right? Like
Yep.
it's two different things.
It's totally.
Um, and I do think too, like when you own an agency, you don't want to have your whole life like taken over by your agency. I'm a founder, you've been a founder, like you don't want your whole life. You want to enjoy your life. That's probably why you went into business for yourself to create financial abundance and have a little bit of freedom. So setting these foundations, they are so, so important. RCP, sales messaging, getting a deck together. I just talked to an agency and the owner and all this, and they didn't even have a deck. And it's like, and their website confused the hell out of me. So I'm not surprised, but that foundation is so important and it has to be revisited because like you're saying, things are going to change 3, 5, 10 years. Maybe you never did the foundation. And even if you're in full operation and you're making 20 million, you still need to revisit that foundation. And I don't think that's done enough. I think it is done in other industries. Like we've talked about SaaS. SaaS is on fire with these things. They fill these buckets, but for
Yep.
some reason, I don't know what it is. The agency space, like maybe they weren't trained this way. I come from finance. I come from a corporate sales background. I think you have similar, you have a similar background that brings you into understanding this stuff, but they just need to set the foundation. They need to revisit it. That would be my advice. What about, do you have any advice you think just to kind of wrap
I
this up?
think it's a great question. SaaS, to your point, has a lot of examples to pull from. And there's a lot of resources, especially recently, that have been poured into helping these companies identify. And again, it's once an industry kind of takes off, it's a lot easier, at least for a while, right? Until everyone starts doing it to copy what's working and start moving in that direction, right? For marketing, the hard thing is I just don't think like if I have a SaaS product that helps manage parking, right? You can come and see what I do well, and you can take your SaaS product that, does online cataloging. And like we have zero competition. But it's hard in marketing because if I'm an agency and you're an agency and we're going to do basically the same thing, it's a lot more difficult for me to feel like, hey, let me teach you what I did that works well and let me do that way, right? So it's harder to look around. And again, because you're selling the same thing, if you just copy what works, now you're not, now you're just copying what works and they already have the advantage and they're already ahead of you. So you're never going to catch up.
Yeah.
So coming back to like a specific example of like what I would recommend, what would work. It's not being, if you cannot sit down and identify what makes you unique. And I don't mean like, now again, if you say, hey, we're the best at X thing, then you better be able to prove that, right? Like you better have the receipts to say we really are truly the best. If you're not, that's okay, right? Only one person can be the best. So if you're not going to be the best, how else can you distinguish yourself? And it's just like we kind of talked about. I want to maybe reiterate what we said earlier, where if you don't have those, you either have to go deeper and identify them and look for correlations between clients, look for correlations between like just what you prefer to do. Sometimes it's as simple as saying like, well, if I have to choose, I want to choose this. But the other direction is be creative and think of something that you can use to really distinguish yourself, right? Maybe this is dumb, but it's like maybe every new client, we send them a box of something, right? Like bacon. I don't know, right? Like some kind of, and like no one's going to work with you because of that, but it's going to help distinguish yourself. And you have to have those same elements to kind of get into your sales message and say, this is what we're going to bring to you that no one else will bring to you, right? We're going to fly out and meet with you in person because that's important, right? We're going to, we have our special unique way of constructing your ad copy that gets XYZ results. We know it's special. This is our method. You work with us, you're going to get access to this powerful method, right? That's way different than just like, oh yeah, we do social ads and here's our results, right? It's really great, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I want access to that method. I want access to XYZ thing, right? I want
Yeah.
that. And so that again, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but I circle back to the brand vocabulary. If you can give people named specific value items that they can take and understand, that will make you a lot more powerful, right? That will make you a lot more powerful. The agency I help run, we just rolled this out. We call it AMP recruiting. So we have a tool, we have a SaaS tool. It's like a SaaS marketing. It's wild. So I've been in that space, but
Yeah.
we have a SaaS tool that helps market job positions for a specific industry. And we realized, hey, everyone's understanding our tool. We have a name for our tool. It's good. But we actually identified, hey, this is the type of recruiting that this tool enables you to do. We created this, we named it, we call it AMP recruiting. And now all of our sales conversations start with, let me explain to you how AMP recruiting works. Let me get you on board with this new way of recruiting. Do you want to do that? And they're like, absolutely. That sounds fantastic. And we say, great. Our tool enables you to do that. Do you want the tool? And they're like, yeah, I want the tool. Let's do it. Right. Because they're sold on this idea of AMP recruiting. We don't sell AMP recruiting. We enable AMP recruiting. We help them. We'll train them on how to do it. But it's an idea that they can understand. They have a name for it. They can take it internally and say like, hey, we should try out AMP recruiting. What's that? Well, boom, boom, boom. And they explain what it is. Giving people something to understand will make your sales message, make your sales process, and make your engagement ultimately a lot more effective.
Absolutely. Clarity is everything. Like I said, if you confuse them, you lose them. People's nervous systems are shot. They just don't want to work any harder. Maybe I'm just shot. I don't know. But
Leaning over
but
a
in,
little bit.
maybe more. But in my experience, this is what I see. The more you dumb it down to your own surprise, you're going to increase sales.
Yeah, I like
You
that.
really are. And I think it's important to work with consultants and work with people that are outside of your organization. They're not too close to it because, like you said, every founder, no offense, every founder is like, we're the best, we're the specialists, we're the number one, and like your employees aren't going to challenge that, like,
Right.
whereas maybe a consultant can come in and be like, okay, tell me more probing questions. Tell me more about why you're number one. Okay. Like they can really help you figure that out, be honest, provide that clarity. So you can show up in the marketplace, educate potential customers, reel them in and close some deals. I mean, that's what this is essentially all about.
I love it.
Um, McKay, thank you so much. I love chatting with you. It's always a pleasure. We should do this again.
We should just hang out
Yeah,
more. We should
we
just make it
should.
happen. We should just
Should
hang
do it
out and
on live.
publicize it for all people to watch. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Let's do coffee chats.
Right. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, feel free to reach. I mean, I'll throw this in there at the very end, right? Reach out if you have questions. Chelsea and I, we're working on coming up with, I think, a way that we can be a little more synergistic, right? Where there can be a little bit of back and forth, because there is a lot of overlap, but there's a lot of speciality that kind of comes in there. So reach out to either of us. We'll have a conversation with you, and then we'll say either we can help or we'll pass you over to the other, because it'll be a better fit. So let's go from there.
We'll work together. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Bye.
Appreciate it.